This election. This election, this election, this election. I'm so not going to miss this election campaign when it's over. Now, one of the issues that I had with this election campaign that I've had for a long time is the seemingly seesaw nature of the race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Just when the polls seemed to be showing Hillary Clinton solidly ahead, all of a sudden, either something would happen or maybe nothing would happen, but within another few days or another couple of weeks at most, polls would be showing the race tightening. And all of a sudden, Trump would be within spitting distance, or so it seemed, of actually knocking Hillary out. It's driving me crazy. Now we have James Comey coming out with this letter that he sent to congressional committee chairman revealing that the FBI had come into possession of new emails pertaining to Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server and that it was investigating those new emails. Of course, Republicans have jumped all over it and are trying to make political hay out of it and doing their damnedest with less than a week to go before Election Day to use it against Hillary Clinton. What? A controversy has sprung up over whether James Comey should have done this at all. On one hand, he had certain legal obligations to keep Congress apprised of new developments in the investigation of the case, but on the other hand, he was also arguably violating certain other ethical obligations not to do anything that could influence the outcome of an election. Personally, I fall on that latter side. Now, look, yes, I abhor Trump and just about everything he stands for. I don't want him near the White House. But even that aside, it's not as if I think the Republican opponents of Hillary Clinton are totally out to lunch when it comes to this whole email server controversy. I've never really gotten that worked up about it. I don't think that there was a major violation, at least on a moral level, on Hillary Clinton's part. But I do think it was very careless and sloppy of her. And frankly, looking at what I've seen of the statute that she purportedly violated, it looks like she actually could have legitimately been held liable, criminally liable, for using that private email server just on grounds of extreme carelessness, which is what James Comey said she was guilty of when he announced last summer that he wasn't going to recommend criminal prosecution of Hillary Clinton. His decision seemed to be based in large part on the premise that there was no intent to commit criminal activity on Hillary Clinton's part. But from what I've read of the relevant law, it doesn't require intent necessarily. Criminal negligence will do. I think there's a case to be made that extreme carelessness is exactly that, negligence. Certainly in other areas of law, particularly tort law, negligence literally means failing to fulfill a duty of care. In other words, carelessness. And if by the FBI director's own admission, Hillary Clinton's conduct in this area was extremely careless, one can make a pretty persuasive case that she should have been indicted. I don't think that James Comey decided not to recommend an indictment simply because he was biased in her favor or in favor of the Democratic Party. He is, after all, a Republican appointee and formerly a registered Republican himself. I suspect, and I've suspected ever since he made that announcement, that the real reason he let Hillary off the hook, essentially, was that he didn't want the country as a whole to suffer the reputational black eye that would have come with having one of its major party presidential candidates brought up on criminal charges smack in the middle of an election campaign. I don't think he just wanted Hillary to win. I think he just didn't want the country to look bad. So I could see James Comey having decided not to recommend that Hillary be indicted simply for that reason. I don't think that's a good reason, objectively, to let someone in Hillary's position off the hook if her conduct really was criminal. Part of the problem I have with that, aside from the legalities of it, is simply, you know, that ordinary people in Hillary's position who had violated a law, any law, based on extreme carelessness, they would have had the book thrown at them. They wouldn't have been able to get away with it, and they wouldn't have been let off the hook, whether for strictly legal reasons or for reasons of institutional legitimacy or what have you. So that was the aspect of Comey's announcement last summer that really galled me. But for Comey now to come out with so little time left before Election Day with this announcement, which he had to know Trump would milk for all it was worth, I just don't see the justification for it. Frankly, I think it's absurd, and I'm wondering what James Comey is on about. What's he hopped up on? Now, there's been an argument made in his defense that if he had sat on this information until after the Election Day, he would have taken a lot of flack for it from roughly half the country, the Republican half, and the credibility and legitimacy of the FBI itself would have been called into question. I actually think that's a pretty lame excuse for what Comey's done here. First of all, he's already taken a lot of flack, and the FBI and Justice Department have already taken plenty of flack from the Republican half of the country, the conservative half, ever since they decided not to recommend an indictment against Hillary Clinton last summer. Somehow the FBI seems to have managed to weather that storm. I don't see why it couldn't do so in the long run. when it comes to the criticism that you would have gotten if the information in these new emails had turned out to be specifically incriminating, but he only made that announcement after the election, so what? Deal with it. You're in a position that involves a certain degree of politics. Maybe in theory it's not supposed to. You are a law enforcement officer, basically the top law enforcement officer in the country. But at the end of the day, being in those kinds of positions is always going to involve a certain degree of politics, whether you like it or not. J. Edgar Hoover was very political in his discharge of his duties as FBI director. I seem to remember him wiretapping a certain civil rights activist. What's his name again? Oh, right, Martin Luther King. I seem to remember reading that J. Edgar Hoover actually arranged for the FBI to send Dr. King private messages threatening to expose his marital infidelities if he didn't commit suicide. So don't tell me that FBI directors can't deal with a little bit of politics every now and then. Yes, James Comey and the FBI as an institution would have come in for a lot of criticism if this information had been released after Election Day. But listen, they already had a black eye in the eyes of conservative Americans anyway. And now they have a black eye in the eyes of the liberal half of the country, the Democratic half of the country. So what good did this do when it came to shielding either Comey himself or the FBI from a firestorm of condemnation? The FBI's credibility and impartiality was called into question over this issue a long time ago. I can see how people might say Comey faced an impossible choice, but it's not really true that it was impossible. I mean, yes, to some degree he was damned if he did, damned if he didn't. But he may as well have just doubled down on the position he was already in. A relative of mine asked me recently, what would you have done? And I said, I would have kept my mouth shut. Now, it would have been a different story if the emails that were newly introduced thanks to Anthony Weiner's ridiculous escapades had actually included clear and convincing evidence of Hillary Clinton's criminality. If there was anything specifically incriminating that James Comey had already unearthed in these new emails, then I could understand him having made the announcement before Election Day, because if Hillary Clinton really did demonstrably break the law, it's fair to say the American people should have been apprised of that before deciding whether to vote for her or not. But if these emails don't necessarily contain any such evidence and they haven't been fully and thoroughly examined yet, Comey's not 100% sure what's in them or whether it's incriminating or exculpatory or neutral, why mention it? Why mention it before Election Day knowing that the other party is going to just eat it up? Maybe Comey was caught off guard by the conservative backlash against his decision last summer. Remember, he got it not only from Trump supporters specifically, but even from a lot of members of the Never Trump faction of the conservative movement. The folks who've had the sense not to get on Trump's bandwagon, even they condemned Jim Comey last summer for letting Hillary Clinton off the hook. Maybe he decided, let me throw the Republicans a bone so they don't hate my guts quite as intensely as they've done since last summer. Maybe. Whatever the case, Comey, you're screwing up. This is nonsense. This was a bad move. No matter how you slice it, you should have kept your mouth shut until after the election, which I understand certain ethical guidelines that govern the behavior of FBI directors and attorneys general and other federal legal officials actually require you to do. I think the case for you keeping your mouth shut was a lot stronger than the case for opening and running it, sending this ridiculous, pointless letter to these committee chairs, who all happen to be Republicans these days since the Republicans control both houses of Congress. What were you thinking? What were you thinking?